It's October the 15th, 2024. I'm your boy, Dana. How is ya? We got a great show for everybody tonight. An incredible show. Absurd show. We're piggybacking off last night's show. And if you didn't see last night's show, don't worry about it. This one will get you the same place, the same pace. You can call in if that's your thing at 589-4406. We're in Canada. And we're going to get right after it. We're a few moments late. I had to duck out of this session, which is a new session that I started twice today for some reason. And just before I went live, everything blinked out on me. So I had to go duck out, come back into the old session. Whatever. Approximately 700 spent fuel assemblies are generated every year. U.S. calls radiation extremely high. This is on March the 17th, 2011. So this is day 6. It would be like Chernobyl on steroids if the spent fuel pool catches fire. Says a nuclear engineer who worked at an identical plant, and that each reactor holds. He's clearly talking about the buildings and the fuel pools. There's 2 fuel pools at the top of each building. I'll show them to you coming up. Each reactor holds 3,450 spent fuel assemblies. 3,450 spent fuel assemblies. 3,450. And each one has 100 fuel rods in it, and they weigh 18 pounds each. They're 12 feet long. So times 1,800 pounds. They hold a lot more than that, folks, by the way. The capacity. That's over 6 million pounds per building. And that's actually correct. That's the real number. That's the real number. Always takes me a few minutes to get my crap together. Storage amount spent fuel pool at each reactor unit 3,450. And that's separate, by the way, from this story. Totally 2 different stories. At each reactor unit, so that's not counting the reactor cores. Because the dirty, rotten scoundrels are out there saying there's like 500 plus in reactor 2 assemblies, which is absurd to suggest that they don't have a repository for nuclear fuel in Japan, let alone anywhere else on the planet. And the storage pools at the top of the building, so that acts as a repository. There is a common spent fuel pool. And the common spent fuel pool would have had 6,840. And another story backs that up. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency themselves, contains 6,375 spent fuel assemblies, which is very close to the 6,840, right? And so you're looking at around 12 million pounds in that one, 6 million pounds in each building. And there's strong evidence, this is the common spent fuel pool. This picture is completely redacted. And we've never seen that. It's very rare to get a picture of it in the first couple of years. And so this is a drone that had flown over it, and that the pictures were released silently on TEPCO's website with no fanfare. Nobody bothered to cover it. And there was a whole bunch of files, so I downloaded all the files. It was 736 pictures from a drone, very high quality. And when you zoomed in, instead of seeing the common spent fuel pool, which was beyond reactor 4, was our old friend no fuel pool. So why would that be pixelated? And this particular same attributes were seen with reactor 6. So keep that in mind, by the way, when we're talking about for the rest of the night, because that's so important. That's your foundation, okay? This is a real simple story. If you can get someone that's honest with you, it's a pretty simple story. But it's complicated by the propaganda that has been prevalent since March the 17th. So this stories we're covering tonight, yesterday, etc., recent stories, most of them are what we call the time machine. So the most important stories are the original stories, right? So say you found out there was an important media story. Would you read, and something happened 2 years ago, would you go back and read those stories, or would you go looking for a recent story? You would go back and look for the original story, right? And you were smart if that is the case. I hear Colette, by the way, Colette, the day of the Hurricane Milton, the supercell storm, when it came into your neighborhood, and I heard it was going to be, they were saying it was up to 2 weeks before you would get power back there. But there was a lot of videos of thousands of light and power trucks. I don't know what company they're using, but let's call them light and power. The restoration crews were already staged all over that area. There was an absurd, I believe it was 50,000 trucks or something total would be pulling into that neck of the woods. And so hopefully they get it back. They got and Colette, in case you don't know, she's down in Florida. And she wasn't on the coast, but that doesn't mean you didn't get the crap kicked out of you, right? And so feel free to keep us updated. We're very curious, and wish there was something we can do for you, but feel free to keep us updated in the chat room when you can. NHK has released pictures showing again just how badly damaged Reactor 3 and 4 are. Reactor 3 and 4. 3 and 4. You know, these two beauties. So, to me, it's funny, but there's nothing funny about it, okay? It's the gallows laugh, which you got. If you were in my boots, you find that really funny because this picture was available when he made the statement. This is the picture they would have been looking at. The fuel pools are okay. Hey, George, the fuel pools are gone. Come have a look at this. Can you imagine what kind of sick and twisted, barbaric subhuman you actually got to be to have that particular job? Right? To get in the media, these chicken necks, and you don't get to see them, you get to see it, right? Which is just like them, but it's kind of presentable. Tokyo Electric Power Company just released this photo of Reactor 4. Of course, they're all going to be gone. But don't worry, Dana got a pretty good stash of Reactor 4 pictures. We snuck into them today. Just released this photo of the Reactor 4 center and number 3 to the left. At the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant taken the day before, which I'm assuming is the 16th. So 3 and 4. So remember, this monster came in at 400 plus miles per hour. It slows down when it gets on land, but it's moving, right? If you're swimming there, you're not coming out of that one unscathed. Chief Cabinet Idano, who I've learned to hate. What a disgusting creature he was. He never slept. He used to brag how he never slept for 72 hours. And then it was only for a few minutes, right? In fact, that's him right there above me. Said that the most recent spike in radiation may stem from a damaged containment vessel in reactor number 3. Now, officially, none of this has happened. As of August 24th last year, the International Atomic Energy came in and went, girlfriend, you are not talking about this anywhere on the planet anymore. Where rising smoke or steam was also observed on Wednesday. Well, let's have a look at the buildings, this disgusting parasite. So, yeah, there is smoke there. I'll give them credit. There's nothing else left there, but there is a bit of smoke, right? So, Around the same time when a fire broke out in Reactor 4, Reactor 2, there was another explosion in Reactor 2 that ruptured a containment vessel. This is on the 17th. This is less than a week. This is 6 days after the tsunami. This is major media. Both almost simultaneous incidents, along with the smoke from Reactor 3. The smoke from Reactor 3. Yeah, there's smoke, but the building is completely gone. Does that matter? No, well, there was smoke, Dana. Yeah, but the building's gone. You have to look at the smoke. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the smoke. Which is, by the way, heading towards number 2, which is right alongside of it. And this is ultimately what's left of a 19-story, 65-meter, 190-foot building. All right? Because there's nothing left. The reactor core and the fuel pools are gone. And this is so significant. And if you don't know this information, you're in the right place. But I mean, my goodness, the industry is so effective at, and people don't understand why is this important, because of all the illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries, illnesses that is coming from nuclear if you get it in your body, and you got it in your body worldwide. And you need to make a stand. You need to understand most of your health issues are Fukushima. And, 80 years now total of the releases from all nuclear power plants worldwide is catastrophic for everything with replicating cells, but particularly the vulnerable species on this planet. The bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain have been annihilated for 13 years hardcore and for 80 years with perpetual fallout from all the fuel pools worldwide. They're all hemorrhaging radiation. And when people say, why is nuclear fuel so dangerous? Because it's splitting atoms into the environment with no containment. And almost all of them are surrounded by farms. So you might think you're eating healthy because you're eating organic, but you better make sure that that's not coming from a farm close to a nuclear reactor. And let me give you a concept of what they're actually doing, because it's pretty impressive how evil can be. I'll explain to you very quick here. Evil just comes natural to some creatures. And just because they do it, like, if I'm a serial killer, I'm a serial killer, right? But if you're the nuclear industry serial killer, then it's considered acceptable serial killing. So this is Sellafield, which is a reprocessing site, which has plutonium, had 4 plutonium reactors going full boogie, and one of them melted down in 1957, which is still hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic. And when you're talking about 1957 to now, we're talking about an inconceivable amount. And if it's hemorrhaging into the Atlantic, and it is, it's hemorrhaging into the environment from the site itself. You can't have one or the other. You have to have both of them, right? These are, what is the catalyst for the emissions into the ocean is a nuclear meltdown. Well, the nuclear meltdown can't be contained. Same as the fuel pools. Okay, so there's 1,000 buildings there, by the way, so it might not look that big in context to everything you're seeing around you. So then you start to appreciate how big, because this is a satellite picture. You consider the fuel pools and production of the reprocessing of the fuel, like La Hague and in France, etc., Donneray. These are hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day through all fuel pools. They're still splitting the atoms they were for millions, for the energy they were. So they produce energy by boiling water. They boil the water by splitting atoms. The atoms that are split in a single reactor could power 1 million homes and businesses. So the amount of atoms it takes to boil a glass of water is unbelievable. It's like Google or higher numbers. And so imagine how many atoms we're talking about to boil water for 1 million homes and businesses. So then imagine taking that fuel out, they're still producing those atoms. 14 months later, start taking some of that fuel and putting it into a fuel pool with no containment. where these atoms are produced all day, every day, forever. And you say nuclear is dangerous forever. This is why it's dangerous, because it's splitting atoms. And none of it on this planet has been produced in 80 years. And its byproduct, which is still splitting atoms. There's no containment anywhere on the planet. So there's over 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging atoms that produces plumes that are the animosity equivalent of a snowstorm each day. And the atomic system is so small but so powerful, it's assimilated into everything. It attacks everything with replicating cells. It binds to it, including you. And if you happen to be the source, then your body attacks each and every atom with white blood cells for the rest of your life. And because this atom is pulsing energy at the speed of light, almost the speed of light every second, it's wrecking chromosomes and DNA and cells, etc. It has to try to repair that and attack the source. So that's Reactor 2. Let's go back to that story. There was another explosion in Reactor 2 that ruptured a containment vessel. So in other words, all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms as far as you can see. And that's the quickest way to get sick, is eat food from these disease factors. These are disease factors. That's Reactor 3. So when you look at Reactor 3, along with the smoke from Reactor 3, it's not the smoke, it's the reactor cores. You know, there's 3,450 assemblies there. There's at least 8 reactor cores at the top of the buildings in the 2 fuel pools, and then the reactor core itself. And they're all just as volatile as the other. This inventory dwarfs, just a single reactor core, by the way, is worse than all nuclear meltdowns in history combined. Pure uranium, pure plutonium, huge reactors. Chernobyl was graphite. It's totally different. It's bad, but it's not like this. And remember, Chernobyl closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. All nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. There's no irony in that one. That's the best way to get the radiation out of the environment, but it's the best way to poison you, isn't it? Is build a poison facility, a disease factory where you can't contain the emissions, have it fall out into thousands of farms, thousands of square miles of farmland, and then ship that out. And so what they all do is they all buy shares in the pharmaceutical companies that treat the diseases created by the radioactive fallout, because they know that's great retirement package. Both almost simultaneous incidents along with the smoke from Reactor 3 on Wednesday caused a surge in radiation, along with the smoke from Reactor 3. No, it wasn't the smoke. Well, it was a little time. 1% to 1% was that smoke. But the video's coming up, actually, of the detonation of Reactor 3. You ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools right out of the building. Japan has evacuated most workers, suspended temporarily efforts to prevent the Fukushima nuclear plant from melting down after increasing radiation levels became too dangerous for workers to remain at the facility. Well, you can't work there. There's nothing to do anyway. It blew up. You ejected the reactor cores out of the site. You're not putting that puppy back in. This fuel is so dangerous, from the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutron bombardment, the beta rays. It's truly like a sniper round if you're in line of sight of the fuel. And so they were using remote control bulldozers just to plow the fuel assemblies that didn't catch fire, or the remains of it, the gobbles, the melting fuel assemblies, into the earth and cover it up with soil. Then they poured cement over everything. Then they put pavement on top of that. Then they poured more cement and leveled it all up. They put steel plates down on top of that, 16 feet by 8 foot planks covering acres and acres. And then they cemented all of that in, put another multiple layers of pavement on top of that to shield themselves from the, well, not them, but the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language, right? This is a scourge of humanity. There is nothing more important than holding the nuclear industry accountable. I can assure you, they're the bane of the 8 million species. Japan has evacuated most workers and suspended temporarily efforts to prevent the Fukushima nuclear plant from melting down. Suspended temporary efforts. No. Reactors had shown fuel all of a sudden. You couldn't go in there and you couldn't go back. And if you go into my playlist, you'll see videos and presentations on 1900 pictures that they originally released after the second year or so, with the dates, and we challenged all of that documentation. And I guarantee you don't see people there working. There is no progress. These are nuclear meltdown. What are you supposed to do at a nuclear meltdown? Suck your thumb? You really think that you can do something at Reactor 3 or alongside of it, on either side or in any area? Anybody really is really that complacent that they think that you can go to a nuclear meltdown and start picking away at it? No, this is nuclear meltdown. The gamma shines, the neutron will cut you into, melt your organs. You'll excrete them out your bum. If that's your cup of tea, I'm sure TEPCO will be happy to oblige you. Japan has evacuated most workers and suspended temporarily effort to prevent the Fukushima nuclear disease factory from melting down. It's crazy to say stuff like that, eh? I can't get over it every time I read it. Let's move on. Both almost simultaneous incidents, along with the smoke from Reactor 3 on Wednesday, caused a surge in radiation. We've done that. Became too dangerous for workers, and when they link to anything, it's always missing. The plan to use helicopters to pour water into one of the 4 reactors and 8 fuel pools that melted down. That's emitting radiation. Because even from the very beginning, they refused to acknowledge the reactors were melting down. It's fascinating, really, isn't it? But we've got a poll up there tonight. Poll to Dina. Did the pro-nuke useful idiots destroy the future of humanity and millions of species by downplaying Fukushima? That's a pretty good poll. I like it. There's only one answer for all of my polls anyway, I think. So once in a while I'll try to trick everybody. But 99.9% of my polls, and we've done hundreds of them, are yes. Fire breaks out again at Reactor 4. Let's have a look at Reactor 4. Oh, she's pretty. It doesn't look too bad to me. Hang on. I gotta wait for it. There's Reactor 4. How bad does that look? That's not too bad. Mom, Reactor 4 caught fire. Don't worry, honey. The nuclear scientists will fix it. Like when you look at if you're on vacation, and this was your hotel or your 19-story hotel, 190-foot building, and I sent you that picture. No matter who you are, you don't need to be an architect or engineer. You know, baby, that bad boy is gone, and it's right alongside of Medusa, Reactor 3. And Reactor 3 is nobody's friend. It's MOX fuel. It's the plutonium mixed oxide reactor. This is a bad, bad apple. It was always a bad apple, and it should never exist. There's no reason to have, because it was illegal for Japan to have weapon grade plutonium, so they were using it up in this reactor. That's the excuse. Oh, we got to use it because we're not allowed to have it. So we've got to put it in reactor data. It's terrible, I know. The emissions from a meltdown like that, or even nuclear plants, are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Try wrapping your brain around that. Because now a single atom is a threat to your health, right? I can put 200 million atoms on a head of a needle. You can't see it. So how are you going to perceive it? Because you can't smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or perceive it. And then so Reactor 3 is 2 billion times more toxic. It's totally different, right? You classified isotopes. So you heard of plutonium and americium, neptunium, strontium. Well, Reactor 3 is making stuff that just shouldn't exist. Because there isn't enough wrong with it. Japan says the roof of Reactor 4 is broken. I don't know. Is that broken? Or is it the building? There's nothing left in the building. Whatever's left in the building, everything in the building was turned into 1,000 pieces, just the right size to throw in the back of a dump truck. Except it's a nuclear meltdown. You can't even do that. And some of the assemblies went, one of them at least went down this right here. So these buildings right there are going to be absurd toxicity. Now, they all had this picture, just like you do right now, but they had it the day before that story was written. Everybody would have seen it. It was on TV. It was in the media. Every site out there was pushing that picture. Because they needed you to go back to sleep. So they show it to you, tell you a lie, and then you don't worry about it the next time you sees it. That's how the world actually works. Because there isn't enough wrong with Japan says the roof of Reactor 4 is broken. That's the nuclear scientist right there, actually. Bless his heart. The sadistic demon that he is. And speaking of demons, the International Atomic Energy Agency is out with a new statement which includes this line. On 15th of March, 2 days before this was written, plant operators are considering the removal of panels of Unit 5, that's Unit 5, and Reactor 6 building, this building right there. Now, this building was pixelated completely out in the photos that were released. The removal of panels from Unit 5 and 6 reactor buildings to prevent a possible buildup of hydrogen. Removing the panel can't prevent the buildup of the hydrogen per se, because the hydrogen is created by a nuclear meltdown. So even if you did remove a panel, which you won't, you couldn't stop the meltdown by doing that. The explosion. It was a buildup of hydrogen at Unit 1, 2, and 3 that led to the explosions at the Daiichi facilities in recent days. No, it was the nuclear fuel was melting down because it had no water. So the zirconium cladding caught fire, burnt at 1800 degrees. That ignited plutonium uranium pellets that burnt at around 9,000 degrees. And then that produced the hydrogen and displaced all the oxygen, and then the fire now was the catalyst for the detonation at that point. So what happens is, if you fill the building up with hydrogen from these nuclear meltdowns, which is produced by the meltdown itself, the zirconium cladding catching fire of the fuel rods, once you displace the oxygen, if you introduce a spark or a flame or oxygen, it'll detonate. It's unbelievably volatile, right? That's when the reactors are burning down. If just touch any water, then it's going to detonate on its own. So a lot of this could have been steam excursion, a steam explosion. Speaking of steam, this is not steam, by the way. This is lethal. Lethal by the liter. If you walk past a couple of liters of this, you're going to drop dead. Just walking past it in a container. TEPCO confirms the radioactive steam came up from underground. At this point, October 17, 2011, the steam coming out of the ground because the China syndrome came in contact with water and water expands at around 1,600 feet or something per liter. That split the earth open. And done that in 6 places. And they have stationary Geiger counters in that area, but they were maxed out at 10 sieverts. And so all 6 of them were 10 sieverts. And the video shows the whole site disappear in this type of steam, and the plant was evacuated many, many times. The homeless, and we can show you the headlines of 16,000 people that had quit that site. And let me bring that up real quick. Not nuclear scientists, not nuclear academics, not nuclear companies, corporations, or anything like that. No, it was just the homeless and the destitute, the victims of society, immigrants who speak the language. That's... How have I got done now? 16,000 workers have quit. That's the second year. There was 865,000 cancers in Japan in the first year. Not everybody got health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. It was a buildup of hydrogen at Unit 1, 2, and 3 that led to the explosions at the Daiichi site. It was a buildup of hydrogen. You know, fracking companies use uranium, depleted uranium. What is it? 8 grams of explosive and per gram of depleted uranium, and 4 grams of explosive or something like that, or kilograms, and then it's 8 times more explosive by adding the depleted uranium. So uranium that's atomized in aerosol is like gas. In other words, it can detonate at that point. It's not like the fuel rods blow up. It's the atomized in aerosol particulates becomes very volatile when you mix it with hydrogen. And it looks like that. And I'll play the video of that for you. This is reactor 3 detonating. And what you're looking at is the fuel pools, 2 of them, and the reactor cores going up, 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 and then falling back down. Notice how the smoke is still going up, but these heavy objects, massive objects, because that building you're seeing right there is the exact same building that just blew up. That was reactor 3 over there. So, because that was the plutonium mixed oxide reactor on top of that, they cook off at around 200,000 degree hotter temperatures or so. Incredible numbers for that millisecond, right? But the energy was enough to toss the reactor core and the fuel pool a couple of miles straight up into the sky. Imagine how much energy it takes to toss around 6 million pounds that high. Have you ever heard of a artillery round that was 6 million pounds? You know how much gunpowder take to boot that out, right? So remember, the building right there is 190 feet tall. So what you're looking at, though, is the big chunks. I'll stop it right there and go over and point it out for you. First, let me make it blatant. You can see these big pieces falling down to your left. Bear with me. I know just how to read. So these objects you see right there, that's the fuel pool in the reactor cores. Right? And the same thing over right there. But you can see huge amounts. Now what created all this stuff? It couldn't be just a shell of a building can produce all these emissions, right? No. What you find out, though, when you're at this as long as we are, and that building there should look like this building, which is Reactor 2, which had a China syndrome. That one actually went down to the Earth, whereas that one went all over Earth. The International Atomic Energy Agency Director General, and he's no longer with us. I'm so sad. New information about reactor core is worrying. That headline is via Bloomberg. The suppression chamber of reactor 2 appeared to be damaged. And so, first off, even if reactor 2 didn't melt down and go China syndrome and blow up and catch fire and everything else for several days, it went China syndrome. That's because the heat signature is so symmetrical throughout the whole building. It couldn't, if it was a fire, the building would have burnt, right? It went down into the earth to fuel it. Because it's so hot, we don't have anything to contain these types of temperatures. No one's going near this building. And on one side of reactor 1 that blew up, and on the other side of reactor 3 that blew up, and reactor 4 that blew up. This is no man's land. By the way, unit 2 completely liquefied. 100% liquefaction of the uranium plutonium core. We've never seen this before in the history of nuclear power. Hopefully that's true. Because I hate to think they've done it before and got away with it. The cause of the fire at Unit 4 is unknown. That's the professor that was saying that. I'm sure he's a nice man. So when you look at Reactor 4, for instance, when they say the cause of fire at Reactor 4 this was the fuel pool in the reactor core, because when they were doing maintenance, so 1/3 of the reactor core is put into the pool at the tops of the buildings, where the reactor core is too. And this is part of the maintenance. When they're doing a fuel change, they do around 11,000 different types of maintenance. It's insane. They spend $100 million on each reactor. That's your standard you're going to spend each year on maintenance. These are just absurd. $100 million a year on maintenance. You could build a lot of electricity with $100 million. Like geothermal, etc. To add insult to injury, Japan was just hit with another 6.2 earthquake, and buildings in Tokyo are said to be shaken, which is in the same spot. So you have these incredibly vulnerable reactors getting pounded over and over with big earthquakes right off the coastline. That if it's going to shake Tokyo 240 kilometers away, how bad is it going to shake this 40 kilometers away, right? Pretty significant. And then they show you this picture. Somebody showed you that picture, and they've zoomed in, and everything is redacted. But what it was a distraction, right? This is them putting that stuff out there. When you look at the building, and there's no doubt the reactor cores and the fuel pools are gone. They're not melted out. They're completely lost to the environment. It's absurd when I see some of this stuff. But you remember the maps, they used the tsunami map that the pro-nuclear community did. And then they wrote all kinds of stories and put it out there with that map in it. And said, oh my God, Fukushima's coming our way. And everybody panicked. And then they came out and made fun of them, saying, hey, stupid, it's the tsunami, not radiation. Stop all the fear-mongering. But in reality, was the real maps existed. And they used a switching bait. And I think it's one of the most loathsome, most hideous, most insidious attributes these people got. It's unspeakable. It's gruesome. It's fiendish. These are terrorists. That's the best way to think of the pro-nuclear community. TEPCO is saying to spend fuel rods in Reactor 4 exposed to the air. That sounds horrible. Really? Horrible, you say? If the fuel rods are exposed, it melts down. It catches fire right away. The cladding is made from the same stuff that they used to use for the big flash cameras. And it had this little hammer, right? And the hammer would break the glass of the flash with the big reflector in it. And then the zirconium, which is the same stuff they're coating the fuel rods with, would ignite when the oxygen rushed in, right? And when you look at the picture, you clearly know if the building is gone. So the building gone, that means all the reactor cores, around 9 of them are gone. These are numbers that are just, they're smaller than what's actually going on top of it. They don't have a repository to store their fuel. They were kept at the top of the buildings. Nuclear crisis is now level 6, says France. But my goodness, to suggest that 4 buildings with 32 reactor cores in the fuel pools and 4 more in the reactors is gone is a simple level 6. This is France, of course. The nuclear industry is crazy. The pro-nuclear communities, they're actually the definition of insane and selfish. Destroy the whole planet for their own gains, because if they lose their almighty nuclear, then their life falls apart, and everybody else be damned. From a Swedish paper expression. Of course, that's not available. After a night of terror, there's a brief calm. Radiation after a night of terror. That's what the terrorists are saying. There's a brief calm. How are you going to get calm? At this 17, everything is total chaos at this stage. Radiation is pared back a little bit. According to the government, Idano, this traitor's monster, there isn't any indication of new radiation coming out. Like, my goodness, man. There's really no reason to be that evil. So you write these paragraphs. I mean, the reality of it was 16 olders should be prepared to die at the Fukushima plant, and the fire was out of control at number 4. Well, any nuclear meltdown is out of control. You can't go back thereafter, ever. You know what's like crazy about this story? Or you know what batshit crazy? Well, the industry's crazy, obviously, right? But these journalists, right? They look so handsome and pretty and everything else, right? You know, they look like nice people. But my goodness, what they're doing by writing these stories, it's unbelievable. It's a crime in every sense of the word. And, you know, the last half an hour of the show last night, and we've been going for, 40 minutes right now, and we're on the same story. Still trying to get through all the lies. It's exhausting, eh? They tell so many lies. But it's the cover story. And you notice how all the links are gone? Sorry. Every story they link to is gone, so thank goodness this story was still there for us to capture, right? So the latest readings out of Fukushima don't show radiation readings that are harmful to humans. And there's lethal doses everywhere. The reactors are detonated and threw their fuel rods all over the place. There's nothing but lethal doses everywhere. I don't know the right word for it. Well, there's a couple of words, but Machiavellian being one of them, but I think it's the only word that's really appropriate, right? Where they're just evil. That's what they are. The latest from Kyoto, there are concerns over water levels of Reactor 4, which is where there was a fire earlier. Well, that's Reactor 4. That's one side of it. Here's another side of it. Looks okay on both sides to me. There's clear, like that cement truck that they're using, it has what they call an adapter so they can pump water. The building's gone though. This is just meant to lull you into lethal complacency. State of panic around the world is palpable. There was an explosion at Reactor 2 and a fire at Reactor 4 coinciding with a surge in radiation, and then the fire at Reactor 4 has been put out. Really? You put the fire out, did you? Well, that cement truck is several weeks later, but they didn't put no fire out. It's lethal doses within eyesight of it. And farther away than that, you've seen how far Reactor 3 ejected the reactor cores. That came straight back down on the site. And all the other reactors blowing up, and 8 fuel pools blowing up, my goodness, and the common spent fuel pool. Markets are diving around Asia. There's a big incentive to lie, wasn't there? There were billions on the line. Prime Minister Nato Khan addressed the nation, told everyone within a 30-kilometer radius to stay indoors as radioactive material shoots forth. But there's not a single picture in these stories, when they had lots of pictures to work with, but there's not a single picture in these stories. So I put the pictures in for you. "50 workers will stay at the plant to pump seawater in the 3 reactors and battle a fire at the 4th. 50 workers. The Fukushima 50. And so right away they came up with this Fukushima 50, and they're going to make Hollywood movies, and they would just drive it down everybody's throat nonstop for the rest of their lives. And they know the majority of the planet is beyond complacent. They're unbelievable slaves to the system. I'd rather have the crazy come after me than the other crazy who looks like a normal person. Japan faces potential nuclear disaster as radiation levels rise. Japan faces a potential nuclear disaster. New York Times. Wouldn't cut your throat very quick. The sudden turn of events and after an explosion on Monday at one of the reactors, and then an early morning explosion Tuesday at yet another. This is reactor 1 detonating. This will zoom in, I think. If it doesn't, I'll zoom in for you. There it is. So that was the same as this building here. That was reactor 1. That was the fuel pool detonating. So the fuel pools... Let me go backwards for 1 second. So the fuel pool shell couldn't produce a cloud like that. That's the reactor fuel in the fuel pool that made that particular cloud, right? And now it's burning forever and ever and ever, by the way. Look at this. That's not made by the shell of a building. That's made by the fuel in the fuel pool. And it melted down. That's reactor 3. It exploded. That's the plutonium mixed oxide reactor, and ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools. Lumps of concrete came ripping. No, that was not lumps of concrete. You would have seen that with reactor 1 if that's not what made the explosion. The explosion is the fuel. So this was a satellite photo of the reactors. Reactor 4 still hasn't blown up in this particular photo. Reactor 1, Reactor 2, and Reactor 3 have detonated. And then you see this picture of the smoke heading out towards the ocean. Have you ever seen a snowstorm? Well, that's what Fukushima is, an invisible snowstorm that covers the whole planet. 3rd and 4 days that the plant had already made the crisis Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl. Like, if you look at Reactor 3 and Reactor 4, and this picture was available on day 6, these are infinitely bigger than Chernobyl. So this, right away, because the official story now is Chernobyl's the world's biggest nuclear meltdown, right? It's absurd, but that's the official story. And everything we see the UN, the International Atomic Energy Agency, puts their fingers in, there's a reason for it. A lot of corruption going on. Number 3 reactor building Fukushima Daiichi plant burned Monday after a blast. It burned after a blast. The blast was ejected in the fuel pool out of the buildings, like we just seen. Oh, my apologies. It diminishes hope. Earlier in the day, the engineers at the plant working at tremendous personal risk might yet succeed in cooling down the most damaged of the reactors, number 2. So that's number 2 over there. Let's do some fun stuff here for a minute. So in your mind, because I respect you, if you're pro-nuclear, I really respect you. And I want you to call in and explain to me why that Reactor 2 is worse than Reactor 3 and worse than Reactor 4. You can call in. We're in Canada. I'll take collect calls. 709-589-4406. Give us a call and explain why Reactor 2 is worse than Reactor 3 and Reactor 4. Could you do that for me? Because I think everybody would like to hear that. I would like to hear that explained. The most damaged reactor most damaged of the reactors, number 2. It's hard to imagine that they can be that evil, isn't it? But no, that's who they are. Nuclear scientists, they got some answering to do. So this reactor isn't the worst reactor. It's number 2, Dana. Oh. According to the government statement, most of the 800 workers at the plant had been withdrawn. So there's the government. They give their statement and then they publish it. They're not withdrawn. They ran away. Or they died. They ran away. Reactor's blowing up. Run. Cooled with seawater pumped by firefighting equipment. You can't spray seawater on a nuclear meltdown. You can't do it. Hello? Hello?
Hello, Mr. Dana. How are you?
That's the moron, Mr. Stalker, for the last 10 years. Cooled with seawater pumped by firefighting equipment. So how can you pump water into a nuclear meltdown right alongside of it? Yeah. I'm gonna play. And let me deal with that real quick here. That's rather interesting, isn't it? Oh, there we go. So you can call in if you're a decent half-human person. Feel free to call in. Calm down, Charlie doesn't qualify as a human. 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. If you're a decent person, you can give me a call. According to the government statement, most of the 800 people at the plant were withdrawn. No, they ran away, right? And what else are you supposed to do? But they'll come out and say these stories, and then they continue to say the story for decades to come, right? Yeah, and calm down, Charlie better watch his ears, because if he goes pissing off James Lucid, he's going to put out more Calm Down Charlie songs, which threw him into a total meltdown back in the day. We'll play it for you at the end of the show, actually. Cool with seawater. Oh, he's busy. Oh, we got James calling in. Yeah. Hello, Mr. James.
Hello, Mr. Dana. Holy shit. I can't believe I thought he was dead. But, I just wanted to call in real quick. We didn't win the contest, but
I seen that last.
About it.
Yeah, I seen that last night. Go ahead, James. I'm sorry.
What's so weird about it is that it's got like 3-something thousand views, and the people that won were like,
Hang on, James. There. Hang on.
I got $100, and they're like, I got like 5 plays on my song. I get it. It's because of Fukushima, but there's no way it could have won.
So
there's no way.
So just 1 second, James. So because the first few seconds got muddled. This is my new phone. This is my first call on my new phone. That's pretty cool. James was saying, folks, that he didn't win the contest. Or he didn't, because there was a lot of like second, third place, fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. And so go ahead from there, James. Yeah.
Yeah, there were like 500 winners that won at least $100, right? Like, so.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
So like it was something like, well, if you got, they said in the beginning, if you the way they pick the winners is based off the views and the likes or something like that. It was like a combination of that. Well, if the track we submitted, Dana, had 3,000 something views.
It did, I know, yeah,
and
it was crazy.
The majority of them had less than 100. And those are the people that won.
Wow.
And it's just a little weird because it wasn't a bad track. It should have.
No, that was a good.
I mean, give me a break.
That sounded great.
I mean,
I listened to it a lot of times, actually.
Because it aimed at Fukushima.
Yeah.
They couldn't let it win.
Not even $100. That's pathetic,
right?
That's so pathetic.
Isn't that powerful though? Because that verifies.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
It was totally worth it. It was totally worth it. It proved them wrong because Colette worked really hard getting it out there. Yeah. You know, some people I know were helping, but collectively it would. You know, that's a lot of views.
That was great
compared to everybody else.
And it didn't even get a kick at the can. It was unbelievable. But it does show you this. The enormous power this industry has.
They're scared of it.
Oh yeah,
that's how scared they are.
Music is the weapon. Let it
fly. Like, oh my God, give them $100. They'll think they're doing. They won't even do that
because the other people would go listen to it, right? More people would want to hear it now because it won $100, right? So it would show up in the statistics somewhere.
I don't know if it's effective or not, but I'm just going to
for a little
while. I'm not going to be doing this forever. You know, I'm not going to be doing this forever. I'll branch off to something else.
Sure, yeah.
But for now,
you already are, yeah.
For now, it's great to think like there's no other AI anti-nuclear music artists out there.
100%.
That's it. I just found a path.
And it's a good legacy. It's a pretty darn good legacy to have too.
It's all because of you know, and Kevin. So, I mean, it's like how it works. So we're all here just trying to remind.
I never dreamt for a second that would be a venue or that would be an option or anything, right? And then when you look at the possibilities, it's incredible. At some point, you have to win, whether you want to, not necessarily that contest, but that music will find its way out there. That music's never going to go away. It'll find its way out there ultimately, right? And ultimately...
Well, it's the equivalent, I guess it's the equivalent of the petroglyphs on the stone, right? It's what we're trying to do.
That's a bit better than that. It's a bit better than that, James.
Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to call in real quick with that, but...
Good stuff. Okay, yeah.
That's it. It's crazy.
No, I love it,
right,
man.
Wasn't so much thing.
Good stuff, my friend.
Right.
Okay, buddy.
Bye.
Yeah. Oh. I didn't hang up on you, James. I screwed up. Dropped the phone. Yeah. So that was kind of awkward because I got my new phone and I'm not familiar with it. I couldn't even find the volume there for the first 30, 40 seconds or something. Oh, well, that's the way it goes. So James had entered a song into a contest a few weeks back. And we used to feature it here, too, on top of that. And there's a lot of people were sharing it, right? And he beat a lot of people hands down. In fact, the majority of the people hands down, he didn't even get a mention. It was completely ignored. Completely ignored. Huh. That's interesting. Okay, let's keep going here because and so let's calm down Charlie again in panic. Let's keep going here now because the idea is to get me off my game, off the story. So let's keep rolling. We got a ways to go yet. And good stuff coming up now. According to the government statement, yeah, we already covered that. And hang on a second. That's right. We'll get there. Okay, here we go. From Swedish paper, of course, every one of these links are gone. After Night of Terror, we already done that one. We done that one. I got, sometimes if I double click, I'll end up having to fight my way back. Yep, that's where we left off. Cooled with seawater pump before, like, you can't pump seawater on a nuclear meltdown because of the temperatures, first off. The reactors that ejected the reactor cores, there was not much to pump water on anyway. Unprecedented phenomenon from using seawater, salt water, in the Fukushima reactors is the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. And so the sulfur is liberated by these high temperatures, and this is a well-known phenomenon from the 50s, from ocean nuclear bombs, and that the carbon, or the salt, the sulfur, forms a spherical ball, and it ingests the uranium, plutonium, americium, the neptuniums, the strontiums, and becomes super hot particles that are known as the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. I can take you down through the studies, but I'm not going to do that right now because I got to get back in the mix here. Here we go. While the same crews battled to put out the fire at the number 4 reactor, which they claim to have done just afternoon on Tuesday. So, while the same crews battled to put out the fire at the number 4 reactor, which they claim to have done just after noon on Tuesday. They claim to have done. You can't put out a fire. You can't put out a fire. What the hell's going on here? Hello.
Hello, Mr. Dana.
My God, what a terrible... Guess who that is? Countdown Charlie. He deserves absolutely no... It's a very... Let's keep going here. So Reactor 4, you don't put out that fire. This is a 190-foot building. Like if you got a 19-story building, you really think a handful of people are going to go and put out the fire where there's nuclear reactors blown up all around them? The plant contains... The plant contains spent fuel rods that were removed from the reactor, and the experts guessed that the pools containing those rods had run dry, allowing the rods to overheat and catch fire. Well, like, when they overheat and catch fire, this is what happens. They blow up, right? That's not overheating and catching fire. That's... Oh, bye-bye, Charlie. These are catastrophic events we're talking about. And so in this picture, you got Reactor 1, Reactor 2, Reactor 3, and Reactor 4 all alongside of each other. And behind it is Reactor 4, because towards me is the, if you're coming towards this way, it's the C. And if you go away from me, the top left-hand corner, that's the common spent fuel pool. That's at the same level as Reactor 4, right? But the nuclear scientists, no, they're not here to. That is almost, they said, as dangerous as the fuel in a working reactor melting down, because the spent fuel can now also spew radioactivity into the atmosphere. That is almost as dangerous as the fuel in the reactor melting down. So which is not the common spent fuel pools are just as volatile as the reactor, and there's 8 at least reactor cores in the fuel pools. And so, like they tell some. This we're still on the same. Well, we're on the second story. It was half an hour. I went into it last night, and we got an hour into it tonight to get. And we're still not through the second story yet. And all we're doing is we just challenge every obvious lie. These are obvious lies if you know anything about the nuclear industry. As dangerous as the fuel in working reactors melting down, because the spent fuel can also spew radioactivity into the atmosphere. Which they're doing all the time. They're always splitting atoms. But when they melt down, down around 6 million pounds per billion, not counting the common spent fuel pool, which would have been double. And so when you look at the pictures, you don't need to be an engineer to appreciate how insidious these people are to make these dangerous claims. People living within 30 kilometers, about 18 miles of the Daiichi plant, to stay indoors. Well, you got to breathe air, you got to drink water. It's going to get the worst doses imaginable. No matter what happens, might as well get out of there and suck it up. You know, what you should do is wrap your head in a wet towel. Bring water with you, and more towels, right? And just, when you take a towel off, hold your breath, wrap another towel around you, pour water, wrap it around your face, and drive away from the reactors in the opposite direction of the wind blowing. Keep their windows closed and stop using air conditioners. So we know that some of these plumes were around 10 sieverts. This is why they evacuated the people from within 10 miles or so. It's so hard to appreciate that this can happen and did happen. But what's crazy is the industry hate that they have for us so much. And this was hard times, I get that. In fact, I was watching a video today on the tsunami. It was like 48 minutes long, produced by the Japanese government. It's outrageous how dishonest they actually are. Mr. Khan, whose government was extraordinarily weak before the sequence of calamities struck the nation, told the Japanese people that although this incident is of great concern, I ask you to react very calmly. And in fact, there seemed to be a little panic. No, it was a total panic. But I do have that video, and I might have to adjust the audio for you, of that where he addressed the nation.
The Japanese Prime Minister appeared on TV to put into play a plan they'd rehearsed for years.
We will secure the safety of the people of Japan, and in order to minimize the damage, the government will make every effort possible. And we ask the people of Japan to continue to be cautious and vigilant and keep tuned in to the reports on the television and radio. And we ask the people of Japan to act calmly.
To act calmly. That doesn't mean they did. You had people dying everywhere and people crushed. It was community after community looked like a wood chipper had their way with it. But huge apprehension in a country where the drift of radioactivity brings up memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I really despise those people that write that particular stuff. The haunting images of post-war Japan. Two critical questions over the next day or so are how much radioactive material is spewed into the atmosphere, and where did the winds carry them? This model was based on the Japanese numbers from TEPCO, which should never have been left in charge. It's just a corporation. You're talking about the poisoning of an entire planet. But they leave those companies in charge so you can blame them instead of the nuclear industry that allowed it to happen in the first place. Why did you build it in an earthquake zone where you have thousands of earthquakes a year? Why did you build it, within 50 miles of tectonic plates? And why would you build it in a place where you have a 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis that are up to 300 feet high? So there is no checks and balances. That's the one thing that everybody is agreed upon. Who's honest is there is zero checks and balances for this industry. I touched my glasses at the last second. I cleaned them, put it back on, then I touched them with my finger. Anyway, let's keep going here. So this model to your left is based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. Do you really think this was caused by bananas and potato chips and walking in sunshine? Flying on an airplane stuff? United States were hit with extremely large peaks, plumes of Fukushima radioactive material. A significant amount of plutonium was released for months. A significant amount of plutonium. And they got a model. This is the Neptunium-239 dispersal. This is based on TEPCO's number. There's actually a plutonium-239 dispersal. 238 or 239? 238. That's very similar to that. Based on 20 days over there and 21 days right there. And so why is that important? I'll explain to you. But don't expect me to have perfect recall, so I'm going to bring up the documentation so you can read it yourself. I'll try that again. I smurfed that one up. It was right there at my fingertips. Can't get anything right today. Alright, here we go. Am I going to get everything but? Try this again. Got no idea what I've done, but I've done something. Done something. We'll get it in a second. While we're waiting, there was 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies. And bone tumors found in the skeleton were the most common cause of death. No idea what's going on here. I've done something. Just bear with me and we'll get after it. I think I had that problem before, didn't we? If I put in dogs, I won't get it. If I put in dog, it always shows up. Right, here we go. I got to put an S on that because I always put in dogs. But it's kind of important. Okay, so $144 beagle dogs were given an inhalation of beagle dogs. You get it? Big nose was given a single inhalation of plutonium. Death from the radiation occurred 1.5 to 5.4 years after the exposures. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred beginning about 3 years. Bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Lung tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors were found in 20 dogs were the cause of death in only 2 dogs. And that these findings in dogs suggest similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium-238. But, I was going through another plutonium study, and it was discovered that human kidneys are at least 50 times less efficient than animals' kidneys are at removing plutonium. So this study turned out to be by Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico, which is the Navy. Dr. Raymond Gilmedy was the lead author, and he had 94 studies. And the dogs dying of cancer tumors from radiation in the bones, for instance, and a painkiller won't give them any comfort. And they didn't even try. They took one of the most loving animals on the planet and done the cruelest things they could to it. A biokinetic model of inhaled curium compound in dogs. The curium isotopes are a major byproduct in the radiated nuclear fuel. So ignore the fact that it's the significant fraction of the alpha-emitting radionuclide inventories. Consider that it's the biggest byproduct. And that curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So what you're seeing happen here, remember that the humans are 20 times or 50 times more vulnerable than the dogs were in that study that all died. But plutonium isn't the biggest byproduct. Curium is. And so the plumes of curium would have been much bigger than the neptunium and the plutonium, because the plutonium looks similar, and these studies are based on 20 days. So when he asks you how much radioactive material is spewed into the atmosphere, which is a pretty derogatory way to describe what's happening, it's a dishonest, I should say, where the winds carried it. Well, everybody knows how this plays out. They do. Now, gas, oil, and coal emissions don't produce plumes like this. Only nuclear has these particular attributes. U.S. states were hit with extremely large peaks of Fukushima radioactive material. This is another story quantifying what I'm already showing you. A significant amount of plutonium released for months blanketed the entire northern hemisphere. And so they go from plutonium to radioactivity from the plants were measured globally, plutonium. But the biggest byproduct wasn't plutonium. On top of that, it was the curium. So if you have this plumes, and they did, we have studies on top of that, of any of the isotopes, we have many, then you get all the other ones too, and there's over 1,000 different fission products that are going to be coming. Some of them have very short half-lives, but majority of them can make it to North America. And the shorter the half-life, the more energetic it is, but that don't mean the long-lived anthropogenic man-made isotopes are not energetic. Right, so natural potassium is energetic, not energetic, but it lives for millions of years, right? But the man-made stuff that might live for millions or billions of years will retain its energy. And so they like to conflate the two of them and say, well, like potassium, once it's a long-lived, so it's not very much to worry about. It's the same with this isotope and that isotope from the reactor. These are unspeakable crimes against humanity when they do that stuff. They're unspeakable, and they know what they're doing. They're like there's so many of them. Sources say there's 1,000 kinds of radioactive materials, radioactive isotopes, daughters, and everything else. This was another plume of the xenon-133 or krypton-85. I can't remember. Covering. This is only 20. This was 20 days. This one. Reading reported on Tuesday show a spike in radioactivity around the plant that made leakage. So calling that a leak, isn't that a crime? Isn't that outrageous, though? To suggest that that's a leak? or even worse, a leakage, categorically was worse than it had been. This is as categorically as worse as it can get. You ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools right out of the buildings, for goodness sakes. And they burn up, right? With radiation levels measured at one point as high as 400 millisieverts an hour. No, like the doses were just frightening. This model is based on cesium-137 and 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air, and the model is only based on 16 days. This is the French government, of course, the government itself of France. And this is based on a study. Now, cesium-137 pulses energy 600 feet every second. So it's a gamma, so it's pulsing, it's going to hit the alphas, betas, neutrons. And when they hit each other, they don't mingle. They reflect off each other, and that's known as an X-ray. And so all the species for the last 80 years, but certainly after this is a pulse event. That's what makes this so fearsome, is it was a pulse event. Very thick plume, and we've had perpetual releases. And these are perpetual disease factories, all these emissions. They attack everything with replicating cells. They infiltrate everything, and they destroy it from the inside out forever. If you have a forest fire, everything in the forest fire is bioaccumulating it for 80 years. You liberate the radiation back into the ecosystem. You can't get rid of it, see? It's like carbon. It recycles forever, except it pulses energy almost at the speed of light every second. And there's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. So hard times, baby. 400 millisieverts an hour. Fukushima Unit 1 and 2, like saying 400 millisieverts an hour, by the way, is the most dishonest and disrespectful to the victims that were there statement conceivable. It's the most cowardly thing you can do, too, is to suggest it's a brutal dose, but the doses were infinitely worse than that. Like the numbers outside of Reactor 1 originally was around 1 million sieverts per hour, because that's where some of the fuel pool from Reactor 3 landed. But just the stacks, which are quite a ways away from the reactors, are lethal doses. 3 sieverts is considered a lethal dose. It'll melt your organs. Eventually you squat down and excrete them, like they did at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Fukushima Unit 1 and 2 didn't roll over and die, or some of them were just found in that position, had their organs melted, and they had the worst diarrhea in human history. Fukushima Unit 1 and 2 exhaust stack is the tall, skinny ones. High radiation dosing rates in the area had measured over 10 sieverts per hour. So that's a lethal dose. So how are you going to get close to the reactors with that in the stacks far away from it? Even 7 minutes of exposure at that level would reach the maximum annual dose to the worker. Oh my goodness. Like, to say something like that, and then to even repeat it, to regurgitate it, just the worst, the most wicked creatures we have on our planet are journalists and scientists, aren't they? Like, they spoil it for everybody. They just destroyed the whole planet. And because of the way it plays out in increments over a few decades, there never was that many birds. There never was that many whales. There never was that many. We don't need more babies, blah, blah, blah. But what about the 8 million species shit? Self-centered moron. Reactor number 1 drywall meters hit new high of 266 sieverts. That's a sniper round. An exposure of 75 minutes would lead to acute radiation sickness, said the sadistic, twisted little demon. Millisieverts. You know you're the worst human imaginable when you start talking about millisieverts at a nuclear meltdown. The extent of the public health risk depends on how long such elevated levels persist. They may have declined after the fire at the number 4 reactor was extinguished. Well, that's number 4. That's what's left of it. This was a 190-foot building, 65 meters, 19-story building. They're the most fearsome creature on the planet right there. Both of them. They may have declined after the fire number 4 reactor was extinguished, said the sadistic, twisted, hateful scum. Let me take you on a tour of these, actually. So that's reactor 1. That blew the building apart. And the fuel pools immediately were atomized in aerosol and released into the ecosystem. Reactor 3 just went straight up, and then the reactor core and everything else fell back down all over the site. Reactor 2 detonated, burnt for days, but it was underground, deep burning its way down into the earth. It is now still, and the emissions coming out of the ground are just frightening. And oh, that's reactor 4, I'm sorry. And that's reactor 1 up here. And so on this angle, reactor 4, like if you were down close to it, let me show you another one of reactor 4. So there's the other side of reactor 4. there's another side of reactor 4. So they're very sneaky, this industry, the apologists, the planet assassins. They're very sneaky creatures, right? So this was on March the 14th. If there was heavy metal inside the reactor, large amounts melting inside the reactor, large amounts of radiation will most definitely be released. Another executive said a chain of events at Daiichi suggested it would be difficult to maintain emergency seawater cooling operations for an extended period. The containment vessel of one reactor had been compromised because the radiation levels could threaten the health of workers nearby. So if one reactor containment was compromised, you couldn't work at the other reactors. And let me see here. Where are we to reactors? Oh, right. Let's try to sit over here. Reactors, there's so much of this is ridiculous, isn't it? Like, when you see the explosion, and they're talking about putting fires out, they're insane. There's so much fuel, and 6 million pounds of fuel everywhere from each reactor. It all work, and if all workers do in fact leave the plant, the nuclear fuel in all 3 reactors is likely to melt down, but it had already melted down. You had to leave because that happened, see? But they don't show you any pictures, do they? Because you can't tell the story if you show any pictures, I suppose. Nuclear fuel in all 3 reactors is likely to melt down, which would lead to wholesale, what a word to use, releases radioactive material by far the largest accident of its kind since Chernobyl. Clearly that's what, like whoever is smart enough to write this stuff is also smart enough to know that the reactors were blown up, right, by the time they wrote their story. Even if a full-blown meltdown is averted, again, how are you going to avoid a meltdown? And just because we got this is a barrel up by the dry storage, which is on between reactor 4 and reactor 5 and 6, and that's on the seaside. So this is the kind of energy that hit that site, right? The reactor, the tsunami ran right through it. Well, hoping that the prevailing winds did not turn south towards Tokyo or west across northern Japan to the Korean Peninsula. Now, that plume model, this plume model that we already looked at, rolling. This is based on this on the 26th. So let's go back. Right. That's the 17th right there. So all the models are showing this kind of number, right? So in order to have that big of a plume by the 17th, because that on its own is pretty impressive, right? The people that had access or writing these stories also would have done these modelings, would have seen these modelings, the projections and the actual modelings. The other was the hope that the worst of the overheating was over, and that the overheating, again, right? They tell so many lies in a bloody story, and because they show you that picture, and to the average person that looks bad, but it doesn't quite. Well, they don't understand what the site is, what the reactors are, and they don't have any context that on the other side it looks like this. It's convenient to show that one, see? But they don't even show you that. It was way past 3 miles an hour already, says Frank von Hippel, a physicist professor at Princeton. The biggest risk now is that the core really melted down and you have steam explosions. It's a little bit frightening because they tell so many lies that for me to tell the story, it's an absurd amount of work. To come out and challenge every lie, it's madness, right? That's the top of Reactor 3, and that's a side view of it. And Reactor 4 is gone, and Reactor 2 is right there, but you've seen him earlier when he said Reactor 2 was the worst one, but Reactor 3 is right alongside of it. And anybody, particularly Princeton professors, are going to know that, seeing that picture. They're not being quoted like anybody in that industry. They were scouring the internet for more pictures. As a result, the nuclear fuel in that reactor was exposed for many hours, increasing the risk for many hours. Why? What do you mean? What do you think? There's a door? Increasing the risk of a breach of the container vessel and more dangerous emissions of radioactive particles. The biggest danger is the fuel pools. They got 8 times more than the reactor, at least, if not a lot more, which is typical of all plants with that boiling water reactor design. The 2 fuel pools are at the top of the buildings. Why would you do that? Why would you put it there, of all places, the most idiotic place imaginable? It's too much money to put it somewhere else. They got a million excuses. Which one do you want to hear? None of them are appropriate. Said that it had fixed the valve and resumed seawater injections by Tuesday morning. But that it had detected possible leaks in the containment vessel to prevent the water from fully covering the fuel rods. I'm only going to tell you 500 more times is what they told. They show you pictures like that, but they should be showing you that picture, see? Mr. Udano, the terror of Japan, said that the levels of leaking at the number 2 reactor remained small, raising the prospect the container was sufficiently intact to protect the nuclear fuel inside the container. It's really milk from Fukushima found with radiation. Power lines were plugged into the nuke plant. Radiation from Fukushima found with radiation, or milk from Fukushima found with radiation. Power lines are plugged into the nuke plant. Just what the hell, man? Yeah, you know you're dealing with crazies when they tell you that the power lines are plugged into the nuclear plant. My goodness. When lying is so natural that telling any other story is impossible. Oh no, we're plugging into the nuke, plugging into the plant, plugging into the plant. Japan time, another blast went off, this time at Reactor 2. That's the third blast from the troubled plant. That was pretty... number 2 is in the middle there. That one up right there. That looks like it's intact, but that one's actually got China syndrome. Following that, a fire was reported at Reactor 4. 4? Should we bring up Helen Caldicott with a Reactor 4 version? In fact, that's a great story. Let's bring that up. Let's spice it up a little bit with a video. Ha-ha! We're off to listen to the crazies. Where's the crazy lady to Reactor 4? Oh, that's up. Why is this story so difficult? Because they tell so many lies. Okay, is it that one? Yeah, this one. So Helen Caldicott was asked in an interview, did Reactor 4 look like that over there or this over here? And so I put those two pictures there. So the pictures you're going to see on the bottom is what I put there. The square up there is the original video. It was a very short one. And Helen Caldicott has wrote 14 anti-nuclear books, and she knows that the buildings are gone. So instead of, because he asks her, right, does it really look like that, or like that, or does it look like that? She said, no, it looks like that. The Japanese are super tidy people. It's just strange. I like to play it backwards. I'm pretty sure it would sound pretty evil.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
Yeah, a boy robot and a boy human being are the same thing. A human being is what they call a bipedal robot. It's just really something sometimes. The dishonesty is just, my goodness. According to the Kyoto War, TEPCO is admitting for the first time the possibility of a meltdown. It also sounds as though this latest blast was the most serious, as it may have damaged the container. When you hear it, what comes to your mind? Like if you're paying attention to these people and you listen to all the lies, then it looks like that, right? And the journalist looks like that, and then they come out and cut your throat with the same. Right, they're laughing about it because, oh yeah, okay, we'll write that story. Meanwhile, radiation levels outside of Fukushima has spiked. I guess that's one word. No prominence at all, eh? Cabinet Chief Dano, now Reactor 4 is on fire. Authorities have failed to keep the Fukushima Daiichi Reactor 2 underwater, and it's now exposed. Well, I mean, failed. You can't do nothing there. You got multiple meltdowns. Once the first one detonates, nobody can go anywhere else. Increasing the threat that the radioactive material may enter the air. According to the New York Times. New York Times would have been well aware of the pictures I showed you. Not slightly aware, but incredibly aware of all the pictures I showed you. There's some hard cases, eh? There's a few pictures that I really admire. You got to be pretty evil to put that picture out. Does that look like a 190-foot building to anybody? You got people in paper suits walking along. Everything is great. coming back from Reactor 4 on coffee break, are they? If you stood there, that's a lethal dose. So it's either a bunch of homeless people dressed up in paper suits or it's Photoshop. Because like the building is right down to the ground. There's nothing left there. The whole story is so absurd that they're walking out from that building, right? The building gets leveled, and then they take these pictures, and now that's progress, Dana. A prolonged struggle continues to keep Reactor 1 and 3 underwater. There is no struggle. Once the building's detonated, one of them detonated, the others are going to detonate because you can't get close to them. They're all built together. So all nuclear power plants have this particular attribute on top of that. So if we have another event, we'll have this again. They were built to fail. A prolonged struggle continues to keep Reactor 1 and 3 underwater. This simply wasn't true. 1 to 3 underwater. Reactor 1, 2, and 3. Like, let me see what I got here. I sometimes can't appreciate that there's that many basket cases, the pro-nuclear, the nut jobs on the planet. So you see the top of the stump is right here. Right, you can see the guts are hanging out of it all the way down to here, for instance, and the same thing on the other side, which is like 14, 15 feet above the ground. So it stands to reason that there's nothing down below that either that's functional, right? So they built this contraption off-site, brought it in, and assembled it with the cranes, and then the panels on the side of it are put there by the cranes. There's no one there. It's done by gravity. They're very heavy, so they just hook on. This was all, and then pretended that they're in the building getting the fuel out of the pools endlessly, claiming that it looks like this on the inside of these buildings. Like it's really, their contempt for us must be just incredible. The nuclear crisis in Japan's Fukushima power facilities continues with 3 reactor fuel rods now melting down, according to Sky. With 3 reactor fuel rods, well, there's 2 fuel pools and the reactor core, they're all melting down. Also worrying is news that the crew of the USS Ronald Reagan has been exposed to radiation cloud just off the coast. We got headlines there where people were saying, the deckhands were saying, they were a kilometer away from Fukushima when it was going bananas. And that 12 of the helicopters, they had to change the engines because they were so radioactive. And that the toilets were all plugged up and people were defecating in the hallways because everybody had diarrhea. In fact, from the plume, right? It was so thick. And not only that, all their digital watches stopped working at the same time. They were laughing at first. The Japanese Safety Agency has said that there is no chance of a Chernobyl at Fukushima. There's no chance of a Chernobyl. Like when that's what it looked like when he said it. There was no chance of a Chernobyl. Wait, now we're on another story, aren't we? What was the date on that? Maybe I'm wrong. No, I don't think I'm wrong. Because of all the other stuff we already covered. Right, the multiple explosions. There's also been warning of a second explosion, similar to one on Saturday afternoon, as pressure builds up inside of Reactor 3. Yeah, there's some hard cases. Let me get some more pictures. That's Reactor 3. That looks pretty good. Yeah, it used to be 190 feet tall. There's a second warning of a second explosion. There's a new low-level emergency. Man. Ruthless, eh? These people are just ruthless. They're ruthless. I don't know how else you describe what they're doing besides ruthless, crazy. It's frightening. I find it frightening. Low-level emergency at a new power plant, the Onagawa, according to the International Atomic Energy. And France is warning its citizens to get out of Tokyo. Well, there was 15 reactors that couldn't go into cold shutdown and had a station blackout, which is considered the worst thing that can happen. And it got a lot worse than that. Nobody knows. They successfully covered up meltdowns by the looks of it at Daiichi plant, the number 2. Daiichi, Fukushima Daiichi is the number 1, and Fukushima Daiichi is 1 in Japanese, and Daiichi is 2. They're identical, by the way, plants. And they admit that they're never going to try to start these reactors. But they want to admit a lot of things, right? On top of that. They're 10 miles up the coast. They got pounded with the same tsunami. The cooling system has reportedly stopped at yet another plant, the Tokai number 2 plant in Ibaraki Prefecture. We make the 3rd plant that was seeing issues. And now this. People in the wide vicinity have been told to cover their mouths as much as possible. Just put a handkerchief over your mouth. Just outside a 20-kilometer radius, notes CNN, is the city of Minamisoma, population 72,000. They moved them back after 7 years. And the numbers there are just ferocious. Like getting 20 million atoms per kilogram in the soil is normal. You got to multiply by 66.6 to get a square meter. These are frightening numbers. These are frightening numbers. And they're growing food there. No one can live there, but they were growing food and shipping it to Canada and everywhere else. Because they love you so much. Kyoto has a long article explaining the latest, and at this moment there may still be reasons to be hopeful. Specifically, noting that the explosion is at the plant near the reactor, but not inside the vulnerable reactors. It's by the reactors, not in the reactors. My goodness. Your mother should wash your mouth out with soap. A professor at the Tokyo University told NHK, Japan's public broadcaster, that only a small portion of fuel is melted. They always do that, don't they? You can count on a professor to cut your throat. That's one thing we know. But the plant is shut down already and being cooled down. Yeah. And most of the fuel is contained in the plant case, so I like to ask people, please be calm. Be calm like my pet hamster, he said. My gerbil. No, and this is what happened, right? No, nothing got out. I'm a nuclear scientist, you can trust me. Famous last words for humanity. Meanwhile, large aftershocks continue to shake and rattle and roll the melted reactors and everything else. It's crazy, the whole story. Our heart goes out to them, but there's poisoning the whole planet is not the way forward. It's been a while since any official progress report on the plant. However, this reporting from the FT Financial Times is encouraging, noting that enough seawater was pumped into the plant to the point that it's not dangerously low. Well, the plant, like the fuel is going to boil whatever water you put in there. You're only supposed to put in a Pacific kind of water, borated, distilled water, right? Because you're worried about a criticality happening in the fuel pools that has decades of reactor cores. And pumping water is not going to resolve it. It's going to boil it away. But they didn't pump water, and we know that because you're not going near these puppies. And so all the reactors were together in one spot. So this stuff is easily covering that whole area. So nobody's walking in there. Nobody's pumping water in there. There was like 2 to 3 fire trucks were destroyed according to the Freedom of Information files. And there's 4 million of them if you're bored. The links are typically below in the bottom of the description. And if you don't take advantage of it and start downloading that stuff and archiving it, at some point the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is just going to disappear that like all the stories we tried to click on for this one, right? If you don't grab that PDF files and download them, with all the emails. You're going to regret that in the future, I can tell you that much. 4 million. I'm linked to them all below my video every day. No change to the radiation reading outside the plant. Really? Well, I mean, when they tell you there's no change, you got to try to imagine what these people really look like, right? The journalist you're going to hear the story from looks like that, and the academic who told her looks like that. In fact, if I remember correctly, that's Yoshida Machado right there. Calm down, Charlie. Minimal amount of radioactive vapor is being released. Minimum amount of radioactive vapor is being released. Let's have a look at that for a second. My goodness, I think you're right. It's so hard to appreciate how evil these people actually are. On reactor number 3, venting out air. There's no power. You mash the country up like a wood chipper. There's no telephone poles within 500 miles of that place. There's evidence that a partial meltdown has already occurred. Japanese jets have been ordered to fly over the Fukushima nuclear plant. The jets were ordered. It's hilarious. What's the jet going to do at a nuclear meltdown again? I can't remember. Anybody know? Japanese authorities will release a small amount of radioactive vapor into the air. Update 8, update 9, 10. Anti-nuclear expert Kevin Camp, who's a disgusting parasite, I might add, with Beyond Nuclear. What a disgusting parasite he turned out to be. He claimed the fuel pools never melted down, don't he? I can play the video, but I'm not going to do it. In addition to the reactor core, the storage pool for highly radioactive irradiated nuclear fuel is also at risk. The storage pool for the highly radioactive... Yeah, that's a neat way of putting it. The pool cooling must be continuously circulated on top of that. You have no power. Without circulation, the still thermally highly radiated nuclear fuel in the storage pool will boil off the cooling water within a day or two. The pool water could completely boil away. There's nobody getting near it after day 1. And what were you going to do? I mean, the tsunami cut through that place like everywhere else. If you had trucks, you still couldn't drive them there. That was a huge tsunami that came in. It was extremely fast and done an enormous amount of damage, right? Without cooling water, the radiated nuclear fuel could spontaneously combust into an exothermic reaction. And it's a lot like thermite, the way it burns, right? Because it's burning at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. You can't contain it, say. And this is what happened. Like, they'll tell you what might happen because they can't tell you what happened. Otherwise, you'll be anti-nuclear, which would be the appropriate response. Since the storage pools are not located within containment, a catastrophic radioactivity release to the environment could occur. I almost feel bad for these people because in order to keep their job, they got to be just scumbags. So does it look like the fuel pools which are at the top of the building that don't exist anymore? It's so when you read these stories, man, and then they talk about radioactive cesium, which is a big concern. The biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod is the curium isotopes. And I'm more worried about the curium, and I'm certainly worried about the cesium, but I'm definitely more worried about the curium. Could go up in flames and smoke to blow downwind over large areas. Yes, but it goes downwind, does it? Given the large quantities, the entire world is now watching the Fukushima plant. This next story is on the 12th. Snap analyst. Japan may have hours to prevent the nuclear meltdown. On March the 12th. That's the next day, right? And the problem is they tell so many lies. I'm stupid enough to try to challenge every one of them. It irks me if I don't. And I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't upset me. It infuriates me, the reality of it is. Can Japan send in robots to fix the troubled reactors? 2011, March 22nd. It's too dangerous for humans to enter the Daiichi #1 nuclear plant. Why not send in the robots? Which is because it doesn't make any sense. They don't have robots. They've had so many meltdowns, so many events. They have so much nuclear waste. They have so many Superfund sites. They could use these robots. And they haven't been able to create one. They haven't been able to come up with a solution for the fuel. They don't want a solution. They tell you they can't come up with a solution, but they don't surround these plants with farms because they like you. It's so insane that they hate us this much and the 8 million species so much that they're willing to compromise the entire planet, is it? Let me show you these stupid pictures. One news report even slammed Japan for lacking nuclear disaster robots, but nobody else has one. Which is really interesting because you have all these humanoid robots, right? And none of them shows up at Fukushima, do they? Why don't you dress them in paper suits and send them to Fukushima? I don't know. Is that the solution? Put a paper suit on them, then they're safe? Anybody at Fukushima with a paper suit on is a very disciplined, homeless person. One of the biggest problems is that the reactor's spent fuel pools have lost and may be continuing to lose the cooling water. If you lose cooling water, any of it, as soon as the rod's exposed, it's bye-bye fuel pool. That thing is going to ignite and burn at temperatures. And once the chain reaction starts, it doesn't need oxygen. And the temperatures it burns at will boil off those pools in just minutes. And that's why you see these explosions. The fires and explosions may have damaged the reactor vessels, the spent fuel pools, cooling control systems. They're not lying. If you want your robot to last long enough for a complex mission, you need only radiation-hardened electronics, but also lots of heavy shielding. 6 feet shielding or something. You still couldn't go into these ferocious places. The result is that if you try to build a robot that can overcome all the challenges described above, mobility, communications, radiation, you end up with a machine that is big and slow. No. The media loves doing the robot routine to the population so they can say, oh, they can't do nothing. It is what it is. We done the best we could. And the journalists would say, well, we love you, you're a hero. We love you so much. What are we doing? I was going to do the poll. Let's look at the poll. One big poll. I'm going to close down the poll. It's that time. If you make it this far, don't forget to give us a giggity. Did the pro-nuke useful idiots destroy the future of humanity and millions of species by downplaying Fukushima? Is such a thing possible? Hell yeah. They have ruined the planet. Did the pro-nuclear a journalist, something to be feared? I mean, when you see these journalists pretending they're in the building to your left, at the top of it in the fuel pool, isn't that the most frightening thing imaginable? And the second most frightening thing imaginable is this is just a fraction of them that done that. The lying is really truly the only thing that they excel at. And my goodness. And I love those stories because you end up, that's the plutonium-230. Yeah, not 238, 239 dispersal model. I love these particular stories because it just shows you the cover story that's still going strong today. But it shows you this unbelievable contempt of all the people that they dragged in to support their lies. Right? And they just went to every institution and got someone else to tell a lie to support their lies. And they just have this incredible ability, right, to have nobody challenge them, which is extraordinary, really. Nobody ever challenges. Nobody challenges the chicken eggs. The traitors of humanity, the straw men of Earth, the people that destroy everybody's future and the species. That's really the core issue of everything, isn't it? They seem like normal, every day. Right? When the journalist's job is to tell you the story, and I interviewed a scientist, and here's what the scientist said. Giggity, 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 giggity. Right? Let me see where we're to here. Oh, right there. Give us a little clickety, 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 if you don't mind. That'd be mighty kind. And consider donating. You can donate. The links are in the bottom of the description. And that's it for us. We're going to play, you remember we had that caller earlier that I hung up on over and over. This is his, we got a song dedicated to him. James might even say, there's a possibility he might create another song. He might be off doing it right now as we're talking. Who knows? But here's one James done of Calm Down Charlie. This is, it was very polite, very sweet song, by the way. Calm Down Charlie should be flattered that, he went into a panic when James released this song, and I started using it right away. I actually stole it off James's site. And we're going to play that. You have a great night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Nuclear scums. When your kids are saying their prayers tonight, make sure they say nuclear scumbags. Take care, folks.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd may shout and roar, Charlie's unfazed, he's heard it all before. His swinging rationale, like a soothing song, says, hold on to logic, we gotta stay strong. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show.